So let's kick off. I first of all would like to introduce myself before introducing James formally. My name is John Davidge. I've been involved with the Leadership Trust now for over 30 years, which is time has flown, I have to say. At the Leadership Trust, one of the things we pride ourselves on is exploring what we call the balancing acts of leadership. The many both ands that apply in leadership, both hearts and minds, both team and task, both thinking and doing, both planning and acting. So many of these different balancing acts, both telling and asking, perhaps one of the most specific ones for today. And it's exploring this complexity that I've been involved in now for these 30 years, and it's been my privilege to help facilitate others through their own opportunities for acts of leadership and exploring these balances for themselves. And it's one of those particular balances that our story is more or less about today. I've been fortunate to know James. We've done we did a development program together last year, and I know him to be a particularly enabling leader. I know him also from first-hand experience to be an absolutely first-class coach. So one of my real interests in this today, and on behalf of the Trust, is to explore what happens when an expert enabling coach heads into a war zone, a literal war zone. And that's basically our story today. What happens when a coach goes to a war zone? James Houghton is the COO of Heart Security. It's a company in the same organisation as the Leadership Trust. So James is a dear colleague. He's been at Heart Security since 2017. And before that, he had a distinguished military career, 7 years in the Army and 5 years as an officer in the Special Air Service. So, James Houghton, today's conversation is about the lessons learned from James's recent experience of leading in a real crisis, and leading in a crisis, leading an emergency, is really so much about people, because people behave in a crisis in unexpected and often unhelpful ways. And when we were preparing this, we came across the story of 9/11, and after the planes had hit, even after the planes had hit the second tower, more than 1,000 people stayed behind to log off their computer systems. Perhaps that's a story of denial, perhaps it's freezing under pressure, who knows, but people behave in strange and unexpected and unhelpful ways. So the lessons that we will hear from James today are thoroughly applicable to civilian life, because crises happen to civilians and civilian organizations just as much as they do to security ones. So the story starts in Dubai. James, who is separated from the mother of his children, has long planned a holiday with his children, and they have just sent him a message to say, good news, I've done our PCR tests, everything's in order, can't wait to see you. James, what happened next?
Thank you, John, for a very kind introduction. Well, I suppose the story starts before that. It really starts in July. Throughout July, we had our team in Kabul, our country management team, were monitoring and managing the situation as we had a number of projects across the country. And in one place in particular called Herat, which is up northwest of Afghanistan. But I suppose the important part to start with is that Heart wasn't really in control of our own destiny. There was a very complex geopolitical situation going on. There was a lot of state actors involved, outside of the Afghan government, putting pressure and really determining the eventual outcome of what happened, which is really the crux of our story. The Afghan government were led to believe that the US were going to stay for a lot longer, and their forces, as a result, were putting up a good resistance against the Taliban. However, in the early July, the US left Bagram overnight, secretly overnight, and as a result, this caused a lot of confidence, a loss of confidence in the Afghan forces. And this really only became apparent later in the month when the Taliban really started pushing against these positions. At the same time, in July, the Taliban were taking large swathes of land, but really Afghan is centered around large population areas, and the cities were holding. Our story really starts in Herat, with our team stuck in a compound which we'd been contracted to guard for a diplomatic client. Herat was slowly getting engulfed and encircled, but it still had access to for evacuation to the border points, and also the airport was still operating. So throughout July, we were monitoring the situation and providing the necessary support and guidance. However, as July turned into August, it became quite apparent that the situation in Herat was coming to a critical point. The country management team, devoid of a country manager because he'd recently resigned, and the new country manager was due in mid-August, was being led by the operations manager, a very capable guy, very good manager, but this was not the role he was put in the position for. So they were under increasing pressure, but the team in Herat were really feeling the stress. And at this stage, you could quite see that there was an element of fear and panic, and to some degree, rightly so, of that team. The country management team were just passing that straight through towards me and through to the chairman, Lord Westbury. We had a number of long conversations about this, but it came quite apparent sort of on the 3rd of August that I would have to go in and actually take control of the situation. It was a really difficult decision, though, to be honest, because as you said in the introduction, I was just about to go on holiday. Really, I had, I suppose, a denial phase. Up in that stage, I thought the situation would manifest itself to a point where it would resolve. But it became quite clear that I would have to go in and really take control of the situation. I mean, going in is, I suppose, giving physical presence is one thing, but I suppose what really was required was a lot of emotional support for the team, because they were buckling under the pressure, and all they wanted to do at that stage was just move our team away from this compound. Pretty because we had a client, we had a contract with that, and although safety of our people is absolutely paramount, we still had commercial realities, and that's the point I said at the beginning. We weren't really in control of our destiny at that stage. You know, we were still reliant on our clients. The country management team had angered the client with their behaviour, and so to go in was really the only logical thing to do. Funnily enough, when I told the chairman of my decision, he agreed with it. But looking back, it was probably the only decision that I could do, and he was kind enough to allow me to make that decision. And I think that's probably showing his sort of excellent leadership, really allowing me to make the decision as opposed to forcing a decision on me. Something actually which I learned from and used throughout the next 15 days, to be honest.
So James, if I can just interrupt for a second.
Sure.
Was there a specific thing that happened that tipped the balance in favour of going into Afghanistan rather than leading it from afar? Was it a specific event or chain of events?
I would definitely say there was. It was the team were going to say, right, we're just going to leave the compound. We're just going to leave, and we're going to drive down the road, take our chances, and get on a plane without the proper risk assessments. And I think there was a real fear that by doing that, we would do two things: put our people in harm's way, and secondly, we would have broken a contract, which, of course, we were obligated to do as a security business. So yes, that was the clear point. But I mean, I think the hardest thing for me really was to make that decision. You know, as I said, phoning up the kids to tell them to say, look, this is what I've got to do. They were fully understanding. I mean, to be honest, they were incredible about that decision, very supportive. The bigger problem for me on a personal level, which maybe is relevant or not, was at that stage, my ex-wife then put in that she's going to take legal action to take my children away from me. So there was a lot of emotional struggle at that stage. I realized the thing I had to do, but obviously, it was a personal struggle because, having all of that in the background, then having to go into Kabul, which probably wasn't a place that I was going to be very welcomed by our team, to be honest.
And talk about balancing acts then.
Yeah.
Children versus your team in danger in Afghanistan. That's the choice, the balancing act you had to make. So you find yourself in country. What started to happen, and what did you do when you got there?
Well, I think before I went into country, I made a pretty critical but very useful decision. The first thing is I handed over the business to someone else. Gordon Hughes took over the business and the running of it. So there was zero distractions on that side. And the other one is that I took in one of my staff who very kindly volunteered with literally no notice. Greg Brownlow came in with me. And I think that was a really important decision because, as I said, I was going into an environment where the country management team felt corporate warrior, all he cares about is the balance sheet, doesn't really understand us, doesn't have no feel of what's going on. And he's only come in to, look at the commercial aspects. Bringing in Greg, which is effectively friendly forces, really allowed a filter between me and that environment. And I think that was a very useful tool, and it really benefited both for myself and I think also for the team cohesion as well.
Okay. And we talked earlier about feelings and thoughts. One of the other balancing acts. How are you feeling at this point? A lot going on domestically, internationally, internally. Good Lord, how are you feeling?
I think once I made the decision to go, and I'd spoken to the children and everything else. Once that decision's made, then it was pretty easy just to switch and focus on the task. I think if you, as a leader, have conflicting things going on in your mind, then I think that is going to be dangerous, and I think you're not going to give your best. So it was easy to flick the switch once I'd made the decision, and it was an obvious decision to make. And I think going into that situation, I could only go in there with an open mind to understand really what's going on. I've got a lot of information before I'd gone in there, but you have to see it on the ground. I think to be positioned in the right place during a crisis is absolutely essential.
Okay. Interesting concept, but that switch, you switched.
Yeah.
So I described to people listening that I know you as an enabling style leader, great listener, really good coach. From that, what did you switch to?
Well, I think we, as a business, we didn't the leadership team in the countries and in certain functions. I think that's really important in a business to do that, because if you, as in my position as COO, you have to take every decision. Firstly, it's exhaustive, but your team never grows, and I think you will never be able to actually achieve all your goals because everything is run and ordered by you. So we'd gone through a phase, mentoring, training, and we got to a stage where people were running their own businesses, empowering. And that was effective. But coming into this now, it was clear after the first meeting that direct leadership had to happen. And when I mean direct leadership, that means take total control. What that essentially means to anyone listening is that I had to change my leadership style, and effectively every decision was made by me, small to big. And I think once those rules were established at the beginning, and people understood that, it probably helped a lot the team.
So another uh, interesting remark. Once the rules are established, how did you signal that approach? I mean, people would. I mean, I imagine some of the people in country would have known you from afar and would have known you personally as well. How do you signal that approach to say, hey, this is now direct leadership. It's a new style. Was there a signal? Was there a way that shifted?
I think in our first meeting we went down, and I think it's important in a crisis you've got to set certain rules. The first one is, every meeting has to follow the same format. If you have a meeting planned, you've got to do it, and you've got to make sure that people attend, and people add value in there. But in the first meeting, it was quite clear. It was quite chaotic. Emotions were running high. There was an incredible amount of stress. And people felt really worried about the decisions that they were making were going to have an impact on people's lives, or on the outcome of what's going on. So it was quite clear to take that away from people, and really, as the leader, then take full accountability, full responsibility for that. I think really helped people's mindset. And there's a lot of pressure. You can almost feel that going away, that people then didn't have to make these critical decisions, and they were relieved. But I think it was, the way I signaled was just in the meeting end of it, I said, right, okay, that's it. From now on, this is what's going to happen. It wasn't, over a period of time. It was, right, we're going to do this, and this is how it's going to work. You're either on this or you're off. And that's the other thing which we all have to understand about a crisis. I mean, we've hired people for a normal job in a normal time. And, some people are good at it, and can step up to it. And some people, it's just overwhelming. And that's not a criticism of those people, because, as I said, we've hired them for different reasons. But as a leader, you've got to very quickly identify who are the ones you can count on. Do people have another agenda except the agenda which is paramount? And really, who is going to be a hindrance? And I also found, going and talking to people, there were other people there who had a lot to add, a lot of experience that I could bring into the team, who wouldn't really have normally been in that management structure. And once I'd established who was doing what roles they were doing, what their responsibilities were, we then started having a lot more productive and constructive work going on.
So I'm really interested in this one. How do you start to identify those people, James, that you can count on? And they might not necessarily be at the senior levels. They might be scattered throughout the whole organisation. I mean, how do you even begin to do that?
I mean, the first one is, obviously you have all your departments, all the different projects, etc., coming in, and you can see the way people are, the way their stress levels, the way they're feeling. And then, of course, I know you've got to know your teams, visiting regularly into these locations. And you can just see people who want to say something, they want to contribute, but they've been excluded from this circle because they're not in that management team. And you can just see them, they want to come and talk to you. I suppose the hardest thing in a crisis is creating time, because there's always something to do. And I think sit down, talk to people, and actually assimilate the information that as it comes in the first 24 hours is absolutely critical, because that really sets the tone for the rest. You don't have time to go into it over a number of days. But likewise, I think coming in and making quick, rash decisions are probably not a good solution as well, because some of the things on the ground were working really well. They just weren't refined enough at that stage.
Creating time. If you forgive me the military quotation, but you may ask of me anything but time. How do you make time, and how do you find your own place of quiet and peace with all this going on? Everyone wanting a probably piece of your time. Did you have an
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's as a leader in this kind of situation, you've got to balance being engaged with people, putting a confidence across, and also going into your own space. I mean, I went in, had my own room with a work area where I sat down, pondered, thought, and actually really try to break the chain, because if you're inside the crisis room environment all the time, everything's happening at once, and then everything's coming at you. And I think you've got to find that space. You've got to find that calm moment, and that, I think, allows you to start making critical choices. Otherwise, you're just making a decision on, as information comes in. Of course, the key point here was we had people in harm's way, so things were happening all the time, and often during the night. And I think as a leader, you've got to try and get that calm period as well. But it's also very hard to get any sleep. I mean, for 15 days, it was, averaging 2-3 hours at a time, waking up, knowing that something had changed, and, you have another issue to deal with. So yes, definitely creating space, creating time, using Greg as the filter before people actually came to me was useful. Having scheduled meetings, but also in this same time, you've got to remember that there was 430 people around in our team, and I think as a leader, if you just end up talking to a management team, you can really miss the crucial part, which is everyone else. And that's something that I really emphasize with going around, spending time talking to, doesn't matter if, what position they were in the business, everyone had equal time outside of these meetings.
So I think we can, those listening who've maybe had this kind of experience, but many listening will not have had anything like this kind of experience. So I'm understanding the way you shifted to a direct style, made it clear how you're going to run meetings, and Greg was basically acting as the filter so that important messages got to you, but you could keep your own peace and quiet within that to make the choices. So all this is still going on, and we mustn't forget that Taliban are presumably still making ground, and from the news broadcast it was pretty fast and furious. How did you manage to keep those 430 people around you calm and collected themselves?
Well, I think the one thing that everyone will understand in this is that fear is contagious. And, when I arrived, you could really sense that people were, incredibly nervous, although Kabul at that stage was still not under threat. But the team up front in Herat were very well led, but, there was a lot of pressure on them, and there was a lot of fear. So I think the main thing is that to stop that fear and add elements of calm, show that there is a process, show that's an order going on, and try and get the confidence in people and the leaders. And I think that's a really important point. People, leadership only really works if people understand that the leader is willing to take that risk, willing to take the right decisions for the right reasons. And yeah, I think that was an important area that we had to change. So going to see people sitting down having a coffee when really what you want to be doing is running back and looking at the next bit of news or working out the next plan. Show people walking past saying, well, if he's sitting there, oh, it can't be that bad, or he can spend 10 minutes talking to us. So remaining calm when really inside you're not calm is again, it was something I'd probably learnt throughout my military career as well. But I think it's an essential tool to have. People take the vibe, or take really, I suppose, the vibe off the leader, and that's who they look to at all the times. And I think sometimes you can forget how important that is.
And was there a pivotal moment during this operation? A moment where it all came together?
I suppose one thing I'll just say on, just before we go on to that one, I think it's really important to understand about when you're a leader is, we talk about the calm moment, but I was also fortunate is that I wasn't getting a lot of interference. Richard, the chairman, was he changed his style, and it became an incredibly supportive style. And I think that's really important for me. I wasn't having to deal with, constant questions, constant interference. I was able to discuss my plans with him. The group COO, Alexander, also was taking a lot of pressure off me, dealing with things that were not in my control, but he was working hard on those. So there was a lot of support above, and I think that's really important. That allowed me just to focus on exactly what I needed to do, which is the situation. So a pivotal moment in this operation was probably when we're all in the operations room with the team waiting to leave. And, we had a helicopter option, air option, road option, safe houses. We planned continuously various contingencies. And the commander, up until that point, had been quite clearly saying, right, I'm moving now. We had to stop him, because of the risk. And I suppose what was interesting, at that time he was about to leave, all went quiet. Everyone sort of looked at me and sort of said, right, are we going? And then the guy on the ground says, I'm only going to move if you say. So I said, yeah, let's go. That's quite a heavy responsibility, but it was the right decision and the right call. And I think everyone then had worked and built into this team.
So how did it turn out? 430 people under some degree of physical threat from the Taliban, probably quite dire threat. How did it turn out, James?
Well, we got everyone out that we needed to without incidents. I'm very proud of the way the team responded and the way they did. And there were some incredible individual, acts of, you could say bravery in this. And we got everyone out that needed to get out. I mean, we kept a project still in Afghanistan, working for the United Nations at their request and at the request of our team there. But everyone who needed to get out got out, and we all got out safely. And that was, important. It was critical. That was the single aim that we had once the situation was to get everyone out.
Well, obviously, congratulations on that. So at some point, I imagine you're back on an aircraft heading out of Afghanistan back to some semblance of normality. Could you talk just a little bit about what coming back and the sort of post-critical moments?
I mean, I think I identified it during the crisis to someone. I said, the crisis is fine. You're effectively working on adrenaline. You're effectively working because you have to work. And I said, it's going to be interesting once we get out. And I think that's really, really what happens. Once you've been on full mode for as long as 15 days, you've then still got to get people home. We had 17 different nationalities, middle of a pandemic, trying to get them through their own country regulations and borders. So still a significant bit to do. But I suppose coming back, you have this relaxation, and then, you sort of go through, I suppose, a considerable phase of questioning every decision you ever made. And you debrief yourself in probably the harshest possible way, as you can imagine.
We when we first talked about this, we shared the metaphor of surviving a shipwreck but being so exhausted by the time you get to the beach.
Yeah, it's a great one.
You can be picked off by the birds of prey, or whatever the best analogy is. So you're now sort of washed up onto the beach. You survived. 430 people are out, or those that needed to be. What was it like on that beach?
Well, I mean, I think every crisis management plan always focuses on the crisis, and I think that, which is in a way what people do. You prepare for a crisis, you then manage the crisis. But actually, post-crisis is really such a critical aspect, and I think. And it's exhausting as well, because you've got to stay in the game. Getting out of the crisis is one thing, but you've got to keep the business going. And I think if we were to take a lesson learned, there would, probably be a longer rest. I was fortunate that I had some support from the group CFO and the group COO who really started helping with, the contracts and doing the cleanup. But the reality is, you're heavily involved, and everything that you do, you're questioning these decisions, and I think it's a very stressful part of it, because you are doubting what you've done, and actually you end up with a lot of regret, and you think you could have done a much better job. And people ask, and rightly ask, why did you make that decision? Why did you do that? Wouldn't it have been better if we'd done X, Y, and Z? Well, yes, it would have been, but at the time, this seemed to be the best thing. So I think post-crisis is such a critical phase for businesses. And one, if you get wrong, then the business will die. Doesn't matter what you've done in that crisis, it will die.
Yeah, you said to me early on, thinking about the after action review, that if you did everything perfectly, it probably wasn't a crisis.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, you said it, so
yeah. And I said it at the time, and I agree with what I said there, because it is so true. If it's an incident or an issue, and you've gone through it and you've got the best result, and there are no ramifications, it probably wasn't a crisis. And I think people have to remember that as well. A true crisis. I mean, we had one crisis, which was Herat, which then evolved into a much bigger one, which was a full evacuation of the country. And so we had a continual crisis over this, and escalating as well. So decisions that get made there, are not necessarily the perfect ones. But again, as I said, you've got to be clear on the aim at the beginning of what the crisis is. That aim may slightly change, which it did for us. Initially, it was moving these 12 from Herat, but then it was to evacuate in good order from Afghanistan.
So if we just use the Leadership Trust's sort of after action review style, and just ask a couple of questions about that. We'd start with, so what went well, James, looking back, and not everything was perfect, of course, but what went well from your perspective? What were the good points of that operation from your position?
I think from the first side, which is which was the key aim, the paramount safety, the safety of our people, which was paramount, that was achieved. And I think we got everyone out in good order, or the best way we could. I think we also maintained good relations with our clients. We didn't abandon anyone. We didn't leave them stranded. And I think that was important. We kept our reputation as well, because what we did is we maintained everything that we could until the last moment, until in fact our clients told us to leave as well. So I think we did well there. I think we also created a very good team by the end. And I think that was evident in the way we, as opposed to other companies, may have left the country. So I think that was good. And we also have maintained that we're still working in that country as well.
And from the other side of the coin, what could have gone better? What would you do differently if you had the chance now?
I would definitely have looked, while we're in the middle of the crisis, looked at if we were going to come back, how we would come back. I think I probably focused too much on leaving and getting everyone out. And, with hindsight, a great thing to do. Of course, we can all, look back with hindsight. There was a chance to come back in. So I think I would have focused more on that. And I think potentially I would have had a longer break after the actual event as well. But as I said, I was well supported, very well supported. In fact, the CFO and COO took on a lot of those extra duties. But I think I would have taken a bit more time off.
Yeah. Well, there's powerful words coming from someone with your background. Some proper rest afterwards. And what was the pressure? Where did the pressure come on you not to take that rest, that extra time?
Well, I mean, I just think it was because there were so many questions about what had happened, and and again, probably should have documented it better, where what we were doing. So it was natural to come back in, and to be honest, it was necessary as well. So I don't think the cleanup could have happened really unless I had come back in. So yeah, I think that pressure was probably on myself, but also people wanted to get it resolved, and people wanted to help, but I needed to be there because there wasn't that knowledge of what happened in country, outside.
So thinking back to the whole operation from the if you like, the gathering storm in July and early August, and your children's PCR tests, all the way through to the outcome of safe evacuation for all that needed it. What would be your key learning point from that whole set of experiences? What one thing sort of floats to the surface for you?
I mean, the overarching one is that any crisis management plan or any leadership training has to actually be meaningful. Training is incredibly important, and I think you've got to put people under pressure. We're very good at doing plans and then doing tabletop exercises, that last for a few hours, and then analysing the results. But actually, in a crisis, you see different people, and we probably don't prepare people for crisis because we're not putting them under pressure. 1, 2, 3 days of constant exercise and scenarios and things like that. And I think that is really important. I think taking the time as a business to do that is essential. There's a few other smaller points that I think that are also valuable as well that I learned. I think you've got to be really truthful with all your staff. I mean, we had lots of meetings with everyone, and they were asking questions. They were saying, we're leaving, when's the plane? You're going to say, no, this is what the situation is. So being truthful and honest to the staff is absolutely essential, because as soon as you start telling them what they want to hear, which isn't the truth or isn't going to happen, then that breaks the trust. And I think that breaks the bond with the leaders as well. I think creating rest and a calm environment was absolutely essential. And I think you've also got to adapt your leadership style, not just for the team, but also for individuals, because people, in a fearful or in a very stressful environment are different, are different people. So yes, you have a one leadership style with a team, and that's how you're going to do it. But individually, when you talk to them afterwards, you've got to adapt, and you've got to try and calm them and bring the best out. And to do that, you've got to keep people busy. You've got to give them jobs, but you've also got to make sure that they understand that the decisions that are going to be made is by one person. So it's very important to get people busy, get people active, but also to limit their bounds of what they can actually do, because otherwise it can be undermining.
Well, thank you. Got some extra bonus learning points for me there. Thank you. Just sort of, I got a couple of final little questions before we ask our participants if they have any questions for you. My first one is, how are you now?
Great, really good. Back into it. I mean, I'm very fortunate to work with a great team who have been very, very supportive, both in Houghton and in Chelsea Group. We've got some excellent people there who have been very understanding, very supportive. And I think it's great to work in an organisation where people are like that. And I would hate to think that other organisations wouldn't have that kind of culture.
Well, good to hear that. And my final one, somewhat personal. Have you seen your children, or do you have a plan to?
No, I saw them. I saw them about 6 weeks after I got back. I probably wasn't in the right state to go and see them. That's why I slightly delayed it. But also, there was a lot to do. I mean, I did made a commitment when I first got into Afghanistan that I would be the last to leave, which I kept. And I also said I'd be the last, if possible, to get to go home, which is one of the things that I achieved. And I think there was a lot of personal or a lot of issues with people who were still struggling or wanted to get home, and so I think that was the most important thing to do before taking time off with them.
Good. Okay. Unless is there anything else you'd like to add at this point, James? That
No. I mean, I just think I think I said earlier. I think leadership is a real privilege. Yes, there is a burden of command, which everyone always talks about, but leadership's a privilege, and I think to be a leader, you've got to embrace it. You've got to look at it. I don't think it's a right, and just because you're in a higher position doesn't mean you're automatically a great leader or you have the right to do that. And I think it's really hard to win over people in a crisis, but it is ultimately a privilege to be in that position.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I'd like to ask participants at this point, either sort of put something into chat or the Q&A box if you have any questions for James that you'd like him to take. At this point, I think the Q&A place is the best place to put them, and if you would put a question in, if you see the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, any questions at that point I will put to James for you. If you stick something in there, maybe add your name to it if you would. Here's a question from Dr. Leah Claret, who asks, in the era of Zoom, James, do you think you could have handled this situation remotely?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think Zoom has been fantastic during the pandemic to keep us all safe. In reality, you need to be amongst people. I think in leadership in a crisis, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. I don't think you can do that from Zoom. I think people are relying too much on it, probably. Still now, I think face-to-face meetings are still important. But no, I think you've got to be really where the crisis is. I think, yeah, it's a great question.
And just sticking with Leah's question for a second, what do you think? How do you think things might have turned out had you decided, no, I can do this on Zoom, Teams, or some other thing? And how would it have turned out, do you think?
Well, I mean, I know if I'd gone on holiday, firstly, there wouldn't have been a holiday. But I think I would have been more stressed. I mean, I'm that individual who would have instantly regretted not being there. And I think the team would have really, I wouldn't say collapsed, but I think they would have had immense pressure, and I don't think we would have got the result that we wanted. Yeah, I think it would have been wrong to be anywhere else.
There's a question from our trust colleague Richard Beasley, who is asking, how quickly were you able to revert from telling, that direct style that you've been describing, to asking? So how are you now?
Yeah, on my way back. Well, I know you probably have to ask my team that, but no, I think it was pretty easy to revert back to. Also, coming back, there was so much to do. I mean, it's been incredibly busy since we've been back. So I think direct leadership style and that stuff, wouldn't work. People have to be empowered and manage. Probably more controls were in place initially, and because we've got to regenerate, redrive. So there is another process going on. It's not business as normal. It's rebuilding from what we lost. So yes, I think relatively easy to fix and move back into that role. But yeah, it was again a good mind change.
And Just before I go on to Dwayne Thompson's got a question, but just following up on that question from Richard. The people with whom you shared a direct style back during the operation itself, how are relationships with them now?
Yeah, I mean, some really good. I mean, some, still we're still in contact. Some we've re-employed. Some less good. But I think the ones less good had probably they weren't in it for the team. They were definitely in it for themselves. And I'll probably leave it like that.
Okay. Well, shifting to something positive, Dwayne Thompson, who you will know as a colleague, he says this. It's not really a question, rather more of a statement, which is during this event in Afghanistan, I was there with James, and the way in which he took control and steered the ship is to be commended. I definitely learned by observing his style and the mechanics of leadership in such a high-stress situation. As Dwayne says, not actually a question, but
fine, yeah, he did a great job. I mean, that was the thing I thought was interesting about the whole process. There were some people I knew not very well, some people I knew very well, but there were just people that just stepped up and took, did amazing things and took incredible risks. And I think hindsight's a great thing. Was it as dangerous as it was? I would look back and say at the time, it was dangerous, but people like Dwayne and a whole host of others did some incredible stuff and really followed the plan. And that was I think the hardest thing in leadership is bringing everyone together. If you lose the locker room, to use the football analogy, then it's never going to work.
There's a question from Maxine Wiseman. Which goes, despite all the odds, you maintained a state of calm and recognized the importance of doing so to alleviate the fear of others. So much on one person's shoulders. What advice would you give to other leaders so they can maintain a state of calm and look after their mental health? I think you've got to have a release. I mean, I was very, very lucky, as I said. I was able to call the chairman to chat. And I think that's for me, that was an absolute blessing. And because he's got, a vast array of experience to talk through plans. And I think that was a great release for me. But also what people are going to be very careful of is having, confiding into other people in the team, because ultimately leadership is a really lonely place. You're making the decisions, you're accountable. And if you start confiding too much in other people, then is that trust not going to be broken? But you're probably not giving the aura that you need. You can't really show weakness. I mean, again, I was very fortunate in the early part to have someone with me who I could talk to and share concerns and get through. But once that person left, I was pretty much on my own. You've got to maintain this persona to everyone. I think that's really important. And you've got to understand your own limitations as well. And I think that's very, very important. So it's revealing this aspect of the chairman of the organization's role here, because he is actually acting in a leadership role, but remotely. And so how direct was his leadership of you at that point?
Probably going to get in trouble here now. I would say he let me get on and run it. I mean, I think there's a great thing in one of the SAS operations in Op Barras, which is when they did the hostage rescue in Sierra Leone. And, they had the operations room, miles away. And once the team got onto the ground, they sent their first radio message, which is, contact 2 casualties, wait out, which basically means in army terms, we'll give you more information. And one of the people in the ops room instantly leans forward to the radio to find out more information. And, the CO at the time said, no, leave them. It's their battle now. It's their fight. And we're just here to support. And effectively, that's what Richard did. I mean, he was there to support. He let me get on with it. And he gave me exactly what I needed at the right time. He probably put some of my world of plans into the back, but it was, when you're in this position, you don't have time to be speaking to someone else all the time because it's so fast flowing. The amount of information coming in from different sources that is so, credible, that you have to filter out. It's impossible to be doing that. So, yeah, his leadership style became incredibly supportive.
Have you spoken to him since about that?
Yeah, we have had some good chats on it. Yeah, and it's been interesting. So, but he again, someone who's really helped in the recovery afterwards as well.
Great. So that's actually, that's an important. It seems a strange thing to say, really, but it's an important subsidiary leadership role, that, isn't it? When whatever the situation is, there will be people outside of the crisis zone, be it a commercial one or a danger zone such as yours, and their style has to be quite carefully judged, doesn't it? I think is what I'm picking up from you.
Yeah, I think it's like, Alexander, the group COO, never really been in a crisis before, and this is his first one. He did such an outstanding job supporting by doing out. I think that's also interesting because it must have been for both him and for Richard, they're wanting to get more information. The urge to phone, and it was probably enormous. But they let us. They let me get on with it, and I think that's a really important lesson. Like when I was doing it, once I gave people a task, I let them get on with it. I think it's very, very important when you're actually doing the leadership in the crisis is not to constantly stress your team with questions and, have you done this? And if you've given them something, you've got to allow them time to do it. Whatever you set your deadline, whatever you set your goal, you've got to do that because they're stressed as well. And likewise, that leadership is, although direct leadership, you've still got to allow people to do that and not be on their case the whole time.
It must be tempting to be on the case, though. And that's so interesting. We have a different question from Vanessa McCulloch in Cape Town. She says 2 questions, but actually she snuck a third one in. And I'll ask you the first one first of all. Does fear have any value when facing a crisis?
I think it's very good. I think fear really sharpens the mind, and I think it really brings it to a realistic scenario. I think without fear, people can take it a bit lighthearted, and I think people don't focus as well. You've got to harness the fear. And that's the point, because I think without it, people would have taken it. It would just be a normal sort of issue that we would have to deal with. So real fear is good, and I think it's how it's harnessed in the team, how it's used is very important. But likewise, you have to manage people's fear as well. You've got to make sure that doesn't become the overriding emotion.
Well, funny enough, you've preempted her second question, Vanessa's second question, which is, how does one manage that fear? How did you manage that fear, James?
I think calmness. I think you've got to be calm. I think you've got to make sure you provide information. You've got to be present as well. That's, going back to Leah's question, but you have to be present. You've got to be amongst the people. You've got to be sharing the danger as well. And you've got to be understanding and sympathetic to them. But likewise, you've got to make sure people are busy enough or doing things, or they can see that there is going to be a favorable outcome. So I think fear, people are always talking. And then, when I got there the first few days, there was all these small groups talking, and you could see it, they always know what they were talking about. What we're going to do, we're being let down by this, X, Y, and Z. But I think it's really important that you get amongst people, you understand it, explain it. And if you showed it, it's fine, and try and put it as a normal day, then people slowly become less fearful and more confident.
Well, perhaps this is Vanessa's third question. is perhaps a really good way to round this whole webinar off, actually, James. Here it comes. Has this experience affected your company culture at heart in a positive way?
Wow.
I thought you'd say that.
I would definitely say it's yeah. I mean, it's brought us all a lot closer. But it's funny, there were some people not involved who straight away went on, questioning why decisions were made, why they were not informed, and I felt there was an element of definitely some toxic feelings that came out from people's own concerns about futures and things like that. But on the whole, the team has been incredibly supportive and working incredibly hard. I mean, they're a great team to be part of anyway. But I think it did bring us closer, and I think shared experiences, because even if people weren't there, it was still shared. Certainly on the post-crisis, has brought us a lot together, and I think we've discussed it and we've chatted it through. Doing the business plan for the year again was interesting because completely different to what we were doing last year, and that brings people together. And I like the way people can come forward with their own ideas and we can bring them on. I mean, leadership's not about having the best idea; it's about taking the best idea and putting it into the business. So you don't always have to be the one with the great ideas, and everyone else is just there to action them.
So, final one from me then. I just make sure. Oh no, there's. Well, Leah has we'll let Leah have the final question. Here it comes, nice and short. How far are you ready for the next crisis, James?
Well, I think we've learned so much from this one, but we're already planning, and we're already having to look at what the next crisis is. Impossible always to predict. The only thing that I know that we will be prepared in is having the right people in the right job. I think the quality of people in the business should never be underestimated. You should never settle for that second person because they're slightly, they're cheaper, or it just seems a lot more convenient. Because really, when you need people, it's a people business, and they're the ones who step up and help. James
Houghton, thank you ever so much for your time and sharing some of these extraordinary stories with us. Enormously appreciated. And congratulations once again on leading such a successful operation.
Well, thank you very much, John. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the questions and everyone listening. It was really a great team effort. So thank you very much.
James, thank you.
Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it is coming up to 11 o'clock GMT, which is the end of this webinar. I hope that's been revealing and interesting in lots of different ways to you. I know that on behalf of the Leadership Trust, we there have learned an enormous amount from having the privilege of having James Houghton as one of our close colleagues. It's been a real privilege for us. So thank you all, and we hope to... any further questions you may have, by the way, please address them to the Leadership Trust. We'd be very happy to pass them on to James in as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Certainly more stressful than being in Kabul.
I'm never truly going to believe that, James.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you. Bye.